The kingdom of Alunza had seen many blessings in its time, rains that came when needed, harvests that overflowed granaries, and peaceful borders that remained untouched by war. But none of these blessings compared to the day Princess Nyara was born. The sky at dawn was laced with a strange gold hue, brighter than usual and strange in its beauty. The midwives whispered among themselves that the queen had given birth to a divine child. When the king, Dahaku, held his daughter in his arms, he saw the golden crescent-shaped mark glowing faintly on her forehead, as if the gods themselves had kissed her. The queen, despite the pain of childbirth, smiled with pride, her eyes brimming with tears. "She is touched by the ancestors," the village priest murmured after witnessing the mark, "and protected by the old spirits." From that day forward, Princess Nyara was known as the Golden Child. Her mark never faded. In fact, it glowed faintly during moments of danger, sorrow, or joy, an ethereal reminder of her sacred connection to the unseen world. Wherever she went, people bowed their heads with reverence. Children sang lullabies about her. Elders placed charms near her room, not to protect her but to show honor. Her mother, Queen Safina, would often cradle Nyara in the palace gardens and hum songs that only the women of royal blood were allowed to know. These songs Nyara would one day sing in her sleep, her voice soft like mist but strong like river current. But peace, as it often does in stories such as this, never lasts forever. When Nyara was 5, the queen fell ill. It started with a light cough, then fevers that came and went with no pattern, then weakness that drained the warmth from her skin. The finest healers were summoned from distant lands, some traveling for weeks by river, desert, and mountain, yet none could help her. The queen faded like a song lost in the wind, and her death left a void that even the golden light on Nyara's brow could not fill. King Dahaku was heartbroken. Though a just and wise ruler, he began to retreat into his chambers more often, emerging only to sit on the throne and speak in brief, heavy tones. Nyara noticed that her father's once warm eyes had turned distant, as though he were always searching for something just out of reach. Advisors, sensing the king's vulnerability, began whispering that the kingdom needed a queen once more, not just to manage the affairs of the court, but to help raise the child marked by heaven. One season later, during the Festival of Winds, a woman arrived at the gates of Alunza. She came on a chariot drawn by black horses with eyes like embers. Her name was Lady Sagara, and she claimed to be a noblewoman from the far western isles, where the sun sets red and the rivers run with warmth even in the coldest months. She wore robes that shimmered like oil on water and spoke with a voice that wrapped around you like silk, soft, beautiful, but hiding something you could never quite grasp. Her beauty was sharp, like a blade polished to perfection, and her smile was always too long. No one knew much about her past, but she carried scrolls bearing ancient seals and offered gifts of spices, glowing stones, and rare herbs that seemed to whisper when crushed. The king, perhaps out of grief, perhaps out of longing for companionship, or perhaps under something subtler, found comfort in her presence. Within 3 months, a wedding was held. Nyara, too young to understand fully, clutched the ceremonial flowers as she watched her father marry the stranger with eyes like quiet fire. Lady Sagara bent down and cupped Nyara's face, smiling. "You are very special," she whispered, "and I shall help you shine brighter." But something changed after that day. The palace grew colder even in the summer. Servants who once sang while working now moved in silence. The queen's old maids were dismissed and replaced by silent women with veiled faces. The garden Nyara loved became overgrown, left to wither under strange orders. The priest who once blessed Nyara every month was told he was no longer needed. And while King Dahaku remained respectful to his daughter, he had become shadowed by Sagara's presence, as though his soul now walked behind hers. Nyara, once free to roam the halls, found herself restricted to certain quarters. "For your protection," Sagara said. "The world is not as kind as it once was." The girl did not protest, but deep in her small heart, she began to wonder if the world itself had changed, or if it was only the palace. On the night of her 6th birthday, she awoke from a dream of fire and saw Sagara standing by her bed, staring at her without blinking. When their eyes met, Sagara simply whispered, "Even the favored must be tested," before leaving like smoke. It became clear to many in the kingdom that while Lady Sagara smiled often, her presence made animals uneasy and caused children to cry. Rumors began to rise that she spoke to mirrors, that she never ate with others, and that her chambers smelled of burned herbs and salt. Some said she came from a forgotten line of witches. Others claimed she was a servant of the flame spirits, whose favor must always be earned, or paid for. But none dared question the queen directly. Not while King Dahaku still seemed to love her. Not while her gaze could silence entire rooms. Nyara, now nearly 7, grew quieter. She still bore her golden mark and it still glowed, though now it flickered more often as though sensing unease. She missed her mother's voice, her laughter, her warmth. She began drawing the same dream over and over, a flame that curled into the shape of a woman and a crown half melted. One day she whispered to a servant, "My mark gets warmer when she's near." The servant, terrified, said nothing and ran. Still, Nyara was no ordinary child. She had inherited more than divine favor. She had inherited strength, silence, and sight. The spirits that watched her from the day of her birth still lingered. And the day would come, very soon, when the flame would rise and what was hidden would be revealed. For the golden child's story was only just beginning. And in the shadows of the palace, the fire was already waiting. Zubri's entrance into the royal court was like the silent arrival of fog, elegant, ethereal, but concealing something colder beneath. She walked with the grace of a dancer and smiled with the precision of a weapon. From the moment she set foot inside the palace gates, everyone knew she was not just beautiful, she was unforgettable. And perhaps that was the first threat Nyara posed to her. Because in the glowing hallways of the palace, despite Zubri's jewels and velvet robes, people still whispered about the golden mark on the forehead of the young princess. At first, Zubri kept her distance. She played her part well, offering gifts, braided words and painted smiles. She would brush Nyara's hair with golden combs, hold her hand in public and even kneel beside her in prayer. But something about the child unsettled her. Nyara's presence warmed the rooms Zubri tried to command. The people loved her, and not in the forced way royalty is loved out of fear. They loved her like they loved the rain after drought, like they loved fire in the cold. It was not just affection, it was faith. Zubri began noticing things. When Nyara walked through the gardens, flowers turned their heads toward her. When she laughed, birds changed their songs. When she cried, which was rare, the palace winds howled all night. These were not accidents. These were signs. And signs, in Zubri's heart, sparked suspicion. If Nyara was a child of prophecy, what did that make Zubri? A temporary queen? A shadow against sunlight? That could not be allowed. She began speaking softly to the king at night. Not of Nyara at first, but of change. Of how the kingdom needed strength, not softness. Of how the people needed to fear the crown a little more. Her voice was honey and thorn. The king, still mourning the loss of his beloved first wife, leaned more and more on Zubri's counsel. And when Zubri mentioned how dangerous unchecked power could be, even in children, the king, weary with age, began to listen. Meanwhile, Nyara continued to grow. At 10, she could recite ancient laws and mediate arguments between elders. At 12, she walked among farmers and learned how to till soil and bind wounds. At 13, she delivered a speech during the festival of ancestors that moved warriors to tears. The golden mark on her forehead shimmered brighter every year. The people began to call her the golden child of Ekuma. And Zubri's hatred grew. It started small. She instructed maids to remove Nyara's favorite foods. Her gowns were swapped with duller ones. The royal tutors were ordered to reduce her lessons. "She is a child," Zubri said sweetly. "Let her play more, learn less." But Nyara's spirit was not dimmed. She read at night by candlelight. She trained with the palace guards in secret. She spent her mornings speaking with elders in the market, collecting their stories, their pain, their dreams. Zubri's cold jealousy turned to something sharper. She hired a new lady-in-waiting for Nyara, a woman named Temra whose loyalty lay with Zubri. Temra began to twist Nyara's routine, feeding her lies and watching for weakness. She would whisper, "The people only love your mark, not you." Or, "The king will marry you off to silence your influence." But even when her heart bruised, Nyara held her head high. She knew who she was. Or so she believed. One morning, Zubri stood before the royal mirror, the one passed down from the first queens of Ekuma. Its surface showed not just appearance but spirit. When Zubri looked, her own reflection flickered. The mirror dimmed. When Nyara passed by hours later, the glass glowed warm. That was the day Zubri made her decision. She summoned her old nursemaid from the far edge of the kingdom, a woman known to practice ash magic, spells born in fire and smoke. Together they began crafting a ritual. "It must look like an accident," Zubri whispered. "But let the flames mark her differently." Nyara was preparing for her 14th birthday, a celebration that would see dignitaries and rulers from distant lands. It would also be the day her mother's golden necklace, a family heirloom, would be passed to her. Zubri offered to oversee the fire ceremony where the necklace would be sanctified. That night, in the courtyard lit by 100 lanterns, a brazier was lit to bless the heirloom. Nyara stepped forward, dressed in white, her golden mark glowing softly beneath her veil. Zubri watched from the shadows. She had sprinkled a powder into the flames moments before the ritual began. As Nyara reached over the fire to place the necklace on the ceremonial stone, the flames burst upward unnaturally. A scream rang out. The fire touched her face. Chaos exploded. The king leapt forward. Guards pulled Nyara back. The crowd gasped in horror. And Zubri, with perfect tears in her eyes, played the part of a grieving mother. Nyara was taken away, her face wrapped in wet cloth. Healers arrived from across the land. The burns, they said, were strange, not just heat but marked with a rune. A symbol. No ordinary flame had done this. Days passed before Nyara spoke again. She sat by a quiet fountain in the palace garden, her face covered. When the cloth was gently lifted by a trusted maid, the girl stared into a hand mirror. Her face was scarred, but not disfigured. And across the burn, where the flame had kissed her cheek, was not ruin, but writing. A name had been seared into her skin in ancient script. The name of a queen long forgotten. Zubri's name. Word spread quickly. The priests were called. The royal historians unearthed a prophecy hidden in the Temple of Ancients. It spoke of a child marked in gold who would reveal the hidden enemy of the throne through fire. Zubri's hands began to tremble. At night, she dreamed of burning mirrors and whispered chants. The golden mark on Nyara's forehead now glowed beside a name written in flame. Two truths bound by divine will. Nyara refused to accuse Zubri openly. She walked through the palace as if untouched by vengeance. But her silence was louder than thunder. And as the days passed, Zubri's shadow lengthened behind her, as if afraid to be forgotten. The kingdom watched. The crown quivered. And the fire that had meant to silence the golden child had only revealed the darkness no one expected. The moon hung low over the palace the night Queen Zubri presented the idea of a purity ritual. She spoke with words dipped in honey and framed in concern. "It is for the good of the kingdom," she whispered to the king. "The child has grown too proud, too adored. It is not healthy for a future queen to be worshipped like a goddess." The king, still mourning the death of his beloved first wife, listened through a fog of sorrow and fatigue. Zubri's voice was the only constant now, her touch a balm that soothed his loneliness. When she spoke of tradition and balance, of rituals meant to ground young royalty in humility, he agreed without resistance. After all, he trusted her. Nyara was summoned to the courtyard at midnight. She wore a white silk robe, confused but obedient. The sky above was thick with stars, and the fire pit in the center of the marble yard roared unnaturally bright. Around it stood hooded figures, Zubri's handmaidens, all draped in red. The king was absent. Zubri said he had chosen to fast and pray through the night, trusting her to guide the girl. Nyara stood with her hands folded, her golden mark shining faintly in the firelight. She looked up at her stepmother, searching her cold, unreadable face for a clue. "What is this ritual, mother?" she asked. The word mother was hard for her to say. It had never tasted right. Zubri did not answer. Instead, she lifted a carved bowl filled with oil, chanting softly in a tongue Nyara did not know. The air grew heavy, the flames turning blue, then violet. The shadows around the courtyard twisted like dancers. A sudden gust of wind swept across the space, making Nyara's robe billow. Fear tingled at her fingertips, but she did not run. Two handmaidens stepped forward and took her wrists. Nyara resisted. "Why are you holding me?" she asked, alarmed. "This isn't a blessing. It is a purification," Zubri said flatly, stepping forward with a brand in her hand, glowing hot, inscribed with the shape of a serpent. "Your light is not yours. It was borrowed. And now you will learn what it is to burn." The handmaidens held her tighter as Nyara struggled, panic breaking across her face. Zubri pressed the brand against the golden mark. Nyara screamed. The sound split the night like a spear through silence. Her knees buckled, but the handmaidens did not let go. The fire licked her forehead, but more than flesh burned. The very air around her shimmered as though reality had cracked. And then she went still. Zubri pulled back, surprised. The firebrand had vanished. Not fallen, vanished. There was no sound. Nyara's body trembled, her face blistered, her eyes wide open and glowing. She looked at her stepmother and said in a voice not entirely her own, "You have awakened what you cannot put back to sleep." Then the wind rose like a scream, the torches blew out, and darkness swallowed them all. When light returned, Nyara was gone. Panic spread through the palace like spilled oil on fire. Guards searched every hallway, every garden, every chamber. No sign. No footprints. No trail. Even the hounds refused to track her scent. It was as if the fire had taken her into itself. Zubri pretended grief. She wept in public, held the trembling king, and organized mourning rituals. She ran away in shame, she said to the court. The ritual was too much. I blame myself. And yet, her eyes gleamed each time she spoke. But things began to unravel. The brand she had used reappeared the next morning, in her own bedchamber. It lay on her pillow, cold now but glowing faintly gold. She screamed when she saw it. No one had touched it since that night. No one admitted to placing it there. And from that moment, the air in her chambers never felt still again. The king grew ill. Not in body but in spirit. He sat by the window and whispered his daughter's name as if trying to summon her from wind and shadow. Servants began reporting strange things. The fire in the hearth refused to light on certain nights. Mirrors warped their reflections. Whispers echoed down empty hallways. One maid fainted when she opened the princess's old room and found golden handprints on the wall, fresh, warm, pulsing. A healer called to examine the king said the palace had become unsettled. Zubri grew restless. She began to fear the dark, ordering lamps lit in every hallway, every chamber. But the darkness found her. In her dreams, a faceless figure stood at the foot of her bed, wrapped in firelight. It never spoke. It only pointed to her forehead. One morning, Zubri found a name scrawled on her vanity mirror in soot and ash. A name no one had spoken in the palace for weeks. Nyara. And beneath it, a symbol, a crown split in two, wrapped in flame. She ordered the mirror destroyed, but the name returned again, written this time in glowing golden embers on her door. The kingdom, once stable, grew tense. Crops failed. Wells dried. Birds refused to nest near the palace. Rumors spread among the villagers. Some said they had seen a girl with a golden mark walking in the forests at dawn, talking to birds, vanishing into mist. In a distant village near the western cliffs, an old woman claimed Nyara had come to her in a dream and left a golden leaf on her pillow. That morning her crops began to grow again despite the drought. Zubri heard the whispers. Her fear turned to fury. She summoned her secret priest, a man cloaked in riddles and blood pacts. Find her, she hissed. Bring her back, or end her if she dares return. But the priest did not return. Days turned into weeks. The palace, once filled with music and courtly laughter, grew quiet. Every corner seemed haunted by memory, every tapestry whispered the same name in the hush of wind. Then one night the king called for Zubri. His face pale, eyes hollow, he handed her something, a page torn from an old royal book. It showed an ancient prophecy. When the child of gold is marked by fire, and the fire reveals a hidden name, the rightful ruler shall return through flame and ash, untouched by time. Zubri's hands trembled. She looked up to find the king staring at her with something like recognition, like regret. You knew, he whispered. You knew what she was. Zubri opened her mouth, but no words came. She was never yours to harm, he said, standing up slowly. And now the fire comes for you. That night the palace awoke to screams. Zubri's bed was ablaze, but the flames did not spread. They danced in patterns, glowing gold, forming the shape of a crown above her head. When the guards arrived, she was curled in a corner, whispering Nyara's name over and over. No one dared touch the flames. They watched as they formed a final symbol on the wall, a name, a warning, a promise. Nyara. And beside it, burned but not broken. The next morning the golden brand vanished once again. And somewhere, deep in the mist-covered woods, a girl with a golden scar on her face opened her eyes. Birds landed on her shoulders. The river near her home sparkled brighter. She was not hiding. She was waiting. The traders first spoke of her. A veiled woman who walked through spice markets without making a sound, her steps like shadows sliding over stone. She never bartered, never spoke. She would point to herbs or tools, lay down the exact coin, and vanish before breath returned to the seller's lungs. But those who glimpsed beneath the edge of her veil told strange tales, of skin marked by fire, not in blotches or wounds, but in elegant spiraling shapes that shimmered and shifted like ink in water. They said it looked alive. They said it hummed when the wind blew. The tales reached port towns, then river villages, where old women paused mid-weaving to whisper of a child born with divine gold on her brow and lost to a queen of smoke and mirrors. They spoke of Nyara, the child who vanished on the night of a ritual fire. Some believed she had perished. Others said she had been taken by spirits. But now the stories flared again, because this woman with the fire-scarred face matched the age Nyara would be, and the golden mark had not faded. It had simply transformed. In the village of Tamwa, nestled at the foot of the Sunstone Mountains, a young healer named Lilo stood frozen before the veiled woman. He had heard the stories like everyone else, but he hadn't believed them. Not truly. Yet here she was, standing in his doorway, asking nothing, holding out her hand to a fevered child. And though she said no words, her presence was command enough. Lilo stepped aside. The child's mother clung to his arm, fear in her eyes, but Lilo held her gaze steady and whispered, "Let her try." The woman knelt beside the child. She removed a small flask tied to her hip, its stopper sealed with a symbol none could read. She opened it slowly, and as she did, a thin curl of steam rose into the room, carrying with it the scent of mountain thyme and river stone. The child stirred. She dipped her fingers into the flask and traced a spiral on the girl's forehead, the same spiral that glowed faintly beneath her own veil. The fever broke before the next breath. When she turned to leave, Lilo followed. "Who are you?" he asked. She paused at the edge of the path. For a moment he thought she would say nothing. But then she spoke, and her voice was both gentle and haunting, as if pulled from the bottom of a well. "I am what was burned but not broken." In the silence that followed, her footsteps were like thunder. Rumors multiplied. Villages argued. Some sent elders to seek her. Others sent mercenaries. A few tried to capture her, believing she held secrets they could sell to kings. None succeeded. She moved like memory, appearing and vanishing at will, never staying long, always healing, always silent unless forced to speak. In a small desert village where water was precious and trust more so, an old woman named Chimera sat across from the veiled one by a fire that crackled like whispering bones. Chimera, a seer in her youth, still bore the silver eyes of one who had seen too much. She studied the visitor long and hard before saying, "You're not hiding. You're waiting." The woman inclined her head. Chimera leaned forward. "For what?" A gust of wind stirred the flames. The woman's hand reached to her veil, and for the first time she drew it back. Chimera did not flinch. The right side of her face bore the echo of a firestorm, molten rivers of scar tissue flowing across her cheek and jaw, yet none of it ugly. It pulsed faintly, alive with gold and red, and in its curves Chimera saw language. "You speak with your scars?" Chimera said softly. "I do," said the woman. "And what do they say?" "They tell of pain. Of betrayal. Of fire that was meant to silence but instead revealed." Chimera nodded slowly. "Then the fire was foolish. For it did not consume you." The woman's eyes flickered. "Not all fire burns. Some fire writes." "Writes what?" "A name," she said. "Mine." Chimera sat back, breath caught in her chest. "Then you are Nyara." It was the first time she had said it aloud in years. The name fell into the fire and rose again with the smoke. Chimera bowed her head in respect. "Does the king know you live?" Nyara did not answer. But she did not have to. Chimera understood. There were too many eyes now. Too many years. The stories had reached the capital, and within the palace of stone and gold, Queen Zuberi tossed in her silken sheets, waking each night from dreams of burning hands and accusing eyes. She had burned the girl. She had whispered lies into the king's ears, manipulated his grief until he signed the ritual decree. Then she had made it look like an accident. She believed it was done. But now, servants spoke of a woman who healed children with glowing hands. Of a voice that echoed in sleep. Of a mark that returned in dreams like a brand upon the mind. Zuberi began to fear mirrors. She covered them in cloth. Birds died near her window. Her hair thinned. Her skin, once flawless, showed cracks like dry clay. Nyara's silence was louder than any accusation. She never marched. Never rallied. She simply walked. From village to village. Feeling. Watching. Waiting. And with every step the people remembered. They remembered the child born with gold on her brow, the girl who smiled like sunrise, who vanished in a night of fire and falsehood. One evening, as twilight folded into dusk, Nyara stood before a crowd in the highlands. Dozens had gathered, waiting for the woman of fireskin. She removed her veil. Gasps rippled across the hills. "I do not seek vengeance," she said, her voice carrying like a bell through silence. "But truth seeks light." A young boy stepped forward. "Are you a ghost?" She knelt. "No. I am the flame that lived." And when she rose, the stars flickered in rhythm to her scars. The elders sent messengers to the capital. They demanded answers. The king, now aged and weary, summoned his court. Zuberi grew pale. The moment she feared had come, not with an army but with stories that could no longer be ignored. And somewhere beyond the palace gates, the girl with fire-scarred skin traced her fingers across an old stone wall, one she had once leaned against as a child. The wall hummed. Her name shimmered in the scar on her cheek. The fire had not destroyed her. It had declared her. And the kingdom would soon remember what it tried to forget. The palace, once humming with music and life, fell into a suffocating silence the morning the king was found lifeless in his bed. No signs of struggle, no warning, just the image of a ruler gone cold in the very chamber where he had last kissed Zuberi goodnight. The royal physician spoke of natural causes, but the people whispered otherwise. It was too sudden, too quiet, too convenient. Zuberi, dressed in mourning robes of midnight silk, wept before the kingdom, her tears flawless and her voice trembling just enough to appear human. But behind her eyes something stirred, not grief but calculation. The crown, once heavy on the king's wise brow, now sat atop Zuberi's head. She held her first court 3 days after his death, seated on the throne that still remembered the weight of a just man. The nobles bowed. The servants kept their gaze low. And yet something had shifted. The room seemed colder, the golden throne less brilliant. Those who dared look closely could see the candle flames flicker away from her. Animals grew uneasy in her presence. Even the breeze that flowed through the grand hall seemed to pull back, as if the very air refused her touch. Zuberi ruled with a precision that was cruel in its elegance. Laws were rewritten. Dissenters vanished in the night. Taxes increased, and those who could not pay were forced to work in silence or sent beyond the borders to reflect. Temples were shuttered. Shrines dedicated to the old gods, the ones who had once blessed the land, were burned or repurposed to honor her name. She renamed the seasons. She changed the calendar. She rewrote stories, chiseled old names from stone, and replaced them with her own. Her rule became the center of time itself. But no crown can sit peacefully on a head that betrayed fire and innocence. Zuberi's dreams became battlegrounds. At night, she saw halls dripping with wax, mirrors cracking without touch, and a voice, low, distant, yet unmistakable, singing lullabies in a language only the river spirits used. She would wake soaked in sweat, clutching the golden sheets as if they might tether her to this world. Servants reported finding her pacing the corridors, whispering names to the shadows, or screaming into walls that held no answers. Once she ordered every mirror in the palace shattered. Another time she set the royal orchard aflame, claiming it was filled with cursed birds that called her murderer in their songs. Whispers began to spread beyond the palace. Stories of a veiled woman who walked through drought-struck villages, touching the earth and bringing rain. A woman whose face bore burn marks that shimmered like golden ink when touched by moonlight. She healed sick children with her hands and left behind dreams of fire lilies blooming in deserts. The peasants called her, the flame that walks. The elders called her, justice returned. But Zuberi knew the name no one dared to speak aloud, Nyara. The royal court dared not utter the princess's name, long erased from every scroll and record. But her presence, ghostly, silent, unseen yet undeniable, grew thicker each day. The queen began locking her doors. Her meals were tasted 3 times before they reached her. She dismissed all old maids and called for foreign guards who did not know the kingdom's history. She forbade songs of old lineage and punished children who drew golden circles in the sand. Yet every night someone scratched a single word into her chamber door, daughter. The high priest, once her ally, came to her in secret and warned, the ancestors stir, my queen. The throne does not forget blood betrayed. She had him thrown into the ocean, his tongue cut out to silence his omens. But the tides washed his body ashore the next morning, eyes wide, mouth open, and ashes in his clenched hand. Even the sea refused her bargains. On the anniversary of the king's death, Zuberi attempted a public ritual to erase the curse she refused to name. She gathered firewood in the sacred square, poured oils of old gods long forgotten, and called upon forces she barely understood. As flames roared, she cast a golden statue of the king into the fire and shouted, "Let the past burn away." But from the fire, a figure emerged, not of her husband, but of a girl with one eye glowing gold, the other veiled in ash. The crowd fled. The fire died. And in the silence that followed, children began to hum a song their parents never taught them, the lullaby of Nyara. From that day forward, Zuberi ceased appearing in public. The palace grew darker, the windows covered. Visitors were turned away. Some claimed to hear crying. Others spoke of a woman chanting the same sentence over and over, "I did what I had to do." But the land had judged her. The trees no longer bloomed in the palace garden. The sacred spring behind the throne room turned black, its waters still. The doves that once flew over the courtyard now avoided it, circling but never descending. Even the dogs howled when the wind carried her name. One servant, young and too bold for her age, whispered that the queen was not cursed, she was just finally being seen as she truly was. Another, older and wise, responded, "No, child. The queen is not just seen. She is being remembered, and that is always more dangerous." And somewhere beyond the mountains, in a quiet village whose name had been erased from maps, a woman with veiled features knelt by a fire and said nothing. Her silence was not weakness, it was a promise waiting to be fulfilled. The palace gates had not been opened to strangers in months. Even the nobility found it difficult to gain entrance, and most commoners only dared to approach in dreams or in desperate prayers. But on the day of the first eclipse in 40 years, a cloaked woman appeared at dawn, her steps as silent as mist and her presence heavier than iron. The guards, trained in war and raised on stories of monsters, stepped back without knowing why. Her veil was unlike anything they had seen, deep crimson at the edges, dripping as though freshly stained, though no wound could be seen beneath. Her robe shimmered with fire thread, but her face was shadowed beneath a golden hood. On her chest hung a charm of obsidian and bone, and from her hands came the scent of ash, rain, and something older. Something primal. "I seek the court," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried. Through walls. Through armor. Through bone. The captain of the guard asked for her name. The woman said only, "You already know it." The message spread like a fever through the halls. Servants dropped trays. Pages ran into pillars. One maid, old enough to remember a forgotten lullaby, fainted on the stairs. Zuberi, queen of a darkening kingdom, stood in her tower, unmoving. The news reached her lips before the words did. Her body knew. Her blood remembered. "Bring her to the throne room," she ordered. "But let no priest, no oracle, no child, no bird near the chamber. Only the court. Only those who once betrayed her." The grand hall, rarely used now, was lit in cold white torches. Tapestries of past rulers lined the stone walls, though many had been replaced with Zuberi's own image. 100 courtiers gathered, many in silence, others muttering prayers in old languages under their breath. The woman entered alone. She did not bow. She did not speak again. She walked down the long red carpet, the very one Zuberi had marched across years ago when she stole a crown, and paused 10 steps from the throne. Her presence chilled the stone beneath her feet. Her veil whispered as if it carried voices. Zuberi sat tall, the crown slightly tilted. She looked at the woman but did not speak her name. Names had power, and Zuberi had once tried to erase this one from the earth. "You are bold," Zuberi said. The woman nodded. "You are afraid." "I rule this kingdom," Zuberi continued. "I speak for its gods." "Then they must be silent," said the woman, her veil dripping again. "Because I have heard nothing from them since the king was buried and the rivers ran backward." A murmur swept through the court. Zuberi's eyes narrowed. "You come here wearing blood. You come here cloaked in mystery. Speak your name or be removed." The woman slowly reached up and pulled back her hood. Gasps exploded across the room. Some stepped back. Others dropped to their knees. Her hair was coiled like a serpent's nest, black with streaks of burning gold. One eye gleamed like the sun in dusk, amber and unblinking. The other was veiled with fine ash, a milky whiteness that pulsed faintly with each breath she took. Nyara. The princess. The flame that walks. The girl who vanished in fire. The woman who returned in silence. "Your queen has no answers," Nyara said, her voice calm but sharp enough to slice bone. "But I have returned not for vengeance. I have returned for remembrance." Zuberi's voice shook for the first time in years. "You died in that fire. I saw it." "You saw what you wanted to see," Nyara interrupted. "A burning body. A silenced child. A future cleared of those who stood in your way. I gave you everything." Zuberi snapped, rising now. "I raised you. I carried you to the gates of power. You were to be a sister, not a snake. You gave me silence when I begged for truth," Nyara said. "You gave me poison when I needed peace. And when I burned, you watched." One of the older ministers dared speak. "But you, how are you here?" "We mourned you." "You celebrated," Nyara said. "You held a feast the night my ashes were scattered. You changed the history books. You gave my name to a storm and said it had passed." Zuberi stepped down from her throne now, slowly, deliberately. "And what would you have me do, little girl? Give you your crown? Kneel before your ghosts?" "No," Nyara whispered. I want your court to remember every lie, every stolen breath, every body buried beneath this palace. The torches dimmed. The walls wept dust. And behind Nyara, in the spaces between shadows, figures began to form. They were not fully seen, not yet, but their presence was undeniable. Shapes cloaked in memory. Children without tongues. Servants without names. A king whose ribs still bore the bruises of betrayal. This is madness, someone cried. No, said a courtier pale as ivory. This is justice. Zubri turned, scanning her courtiers. She had ruled by fear, by iron, by rewriting the world. But now her court, her own people were beginning to shift. To question. To remember. Nyara stepped forward. My veil carries blood not because I killed, she said, but because I survived. It is not my anger you fear. It is my truth. Zubri raised her hand to call her guards. None moved. She looked to her advisors. They averted their eyes. You have no kingdom, Nyara said. Only walls built of silence. The room trembled. Beneath their feet, a low hum began to rise. A song, familiar to no one and everyone. The sound of the earth awakening. Of time catching up. Zubri fell to her knees. You cannot undo the past, she whispered. No, Nyara replied, but I can remind the future. And with that she turned. She did not wait for applause or vengeance or forgiveness. She walked out the same way she had entered, slowly, steadily, her veil trailing behind her like a river of memory. As the heavy palace doors closed, the hall stood frozen. Then, as if lifted by invisible hands, every torch flared once with white fire, and went out. The air was thick with memory. Even as Nyara stood before the trembling Queen Zubri, the name carved in flame behind them continued to burn. But the fire did not consume, it glowed with the weight of something older than stone, older than kingship, older than the palace itself. Nyara. The name echoed in the bones of those who heard it. It was more than the name of a girl burned and betrayed. It was the name of one who had lived before, long before. In the deep silence that followed the flaming vision, a low rumble vibrated through the ground beneath their feet. At first they thought it was thunder. But the sky was clear. In the northern wing of the palace, where the statues of past rulers lined the marbled hallway, something stirred. The statue of Queen Maisha, carved in serene granite, cracked down the center of its crown. Dust puffed into the air, followed by a hairline fracture running across her stone lips. In the garden shrine, where only the high priest was allowed to walk barefoot on the sacred ground, the earth split open between the roots of the old baobab tree. A river of glowing worms emerged, spiraling upward in patterns long lost to the people, but known to the ancestors. And in the city beyond the palace, the people, those who had watched the flame rise from the royal tower, began to murmur. First in confusion, then in curiosity, then in realization. Nyara. The elders whispered it with closed eyes. The children repeated it in their sleep. The name tasted familiar on their tongues. As if it had been there all along, buried beneath layers of forgetting. A name not just of a woman but of a lineage. A power. A wound. Back in the court, the royal priest collapsed to his knees. His hand trembled as he removed the golden headpiece, a symbol that had rested on the heads of priests for generations. I remember, he whispered. Nyara turned toward him, her eyes still glowing faintly from the fire's echo. What do you remember? She was the first queen, the priest said, voice breaking. Before the line of kings. Before the great record was rewritten. Before Zubri's bloodline claimed the throne. Her name was struck from every scroll, every song, every stone. She ruled before your fathers ruled, another elder said, his voice hollow with shame. And we let her be erased. We helped them forget. Nyara closed her eyes. The name that had come to her in fire, the name that survived the flames, had not just belonged to her alone. It was a name passed down, hidden in dreams and whispers, sheltered in exile. Her own mother had called her Nyara. But now she understood, her mother had not chosen that name. She had restored it. It had been hers before she was born. And now it was waking again. In the mountains to the east, the tombs trembled. Stone slabs that had not moved in hundreds of years shifted, revealing carvings beneath. Names once worn away by time reappeared in glowing red. A shepherd boy watching from the cliffs saw the symbols and fell to his knees, weeping. He did not know why. In the south, near the river of bones, fishermen pulled up nets filled not with fish, but with shards of old crowns, golden, blackened with soot, still warm. The land itself was remembering. And in the palace the cracks deepened. One by one statues crumbled. But not all. Only those of kings and queens whose names were written after the perch. Each shattering statue sent a pulse through the earth, like the beat of a long-dormant heart. Nyara felt it in her feet. She looked up at the pillars and walls, the symbols carved high above where ordinary eyes could not see. She saw something that no one else had noticed before. Beneath the carvings of lions and suns were the faint traces of older glyphs, buried beneath layers of paint and stone. A crown shaped like fire. A hand held to the sky. A name written in a circle. Nyara was not the beginning, she said softly. She was the bridge. I was born carrying her name, but the power belongs to all of us who were made to forget. The people in the court were weeping now. Not out of fear, but release. As if a long-forgotten song had returned to them. Suddenly the floor beneath the throne split open with a sharp crack. The throne tilted. Queen Zuberi screamed and leapt back, stumbling as the stone crumbled beneath her. From the darkness below, a golden platform rose, ancient, dustless, glowing with symbols no one had seen in centuries. At its center, embedded like a heart, was a circular crown made of obsidian and bone. The priest gasped. The crown of the ancestress. The guards dropped their spears and fell to their knees. Even Zuberi could no longer deny what stood before them. Take it, the priest whispered, voice hoarse. It was always yours. But Nyara didn't move. Not yet. Her eyes searched the crowd, and found not just loyalty but pain. These people had lived generations in the lie. They were raised on stories that erased their mothers, silenced their daughters, and glorified false kings. I will not wear this crown alone, she said. The ancestors do not want a throne. They want the truth. The line must end and begin anew. The ground trembled once more. The walls pulsed. Somewhere deep below, the ancestors stirred louder, no longer a hum but a heartbeat. In the city, people lit fires without knowing why. They gathered around them and told stories. Not from scrolls, but from memory. Grandmothers sang songs they hadn't sung since they were girls. Young men carved symbols into wood, guided by dreams they barely understood. The land remembered. The people remembered. The ancestors were rising not to rule, but to awaken. And in the royal court, as the final statue cracked and fell, Nyara stepped forward at last. She touched the obsidian crown and it did not burn her. Instead, it pulsed once with a deep golden light, not just in power but recognition. The priest stood. Queen Nyara. But she stopped him. No, she said. I am not Queen Nyara. I am her echo. I am the one who remembers what was taken. But now we all must carry it. And as she turned, the flames above the throne flickered once more, then dimmed. The name remained, carved forever in stone. Nyara. And beneath it, a second name began to glow beside it. We remember. In the hollow of the ancient courtyard, torches blazed as dusk bled into night. The council of elders gathered by the carved obsidian throne, their robes pale white with dust and shock. Nyara stood at the center, crowned not by gold, but by flame-patterned scars that pulsed faintly in torchlight. Before them all sat Zuberi, cloaked in royal shame, her eyes dark pools of regret and fear. A silence stretched between the elders and the fallen queen. No one dared speak first. Then the high priest, voice trembling, cleared his throat and began, We summon the council of truth in the name of ancestress Nyara, who returns to restore that which was stolen. Nyara nodded once. A sudden wind rustled the courtyard, though no breeze blew. The elders stiffened, gripping their staffs, breathing fast. One by one their eyes rolled back, and the torches flickered in worshipful submission. They spoke not with their voices but through them. I see buried bones under palace walls, intoned the first elder, Amoja. Young bodies, promised to strengthen crowns. I see firebrands dipped in oil, and the sunless dread of lies told in the dark. A second elder, Zuina, raised a trembling hand. I see the ritual fires you claimed were necessity, how they licked her face with poison flames. I see the king's sudden death and your midnight prayers curdling with silent triumph. The third elder, aged rain-blessed Sephu, spoke with a rasp that did not belong to his years. You stole names from scrolls. You rewrote history in your favor. You erased mothers whose spirits now weep beneath cracked statues. Zuberi's lips quivered as each elder confessed truths Nyara already knew, but everyone listened. Her defenders were silent. The guards edged back. Even the cornerstone pillars hummed with ancestral presence. Why? Zuberi finally breathed. Why destroy me in this world? Why resurrect her name only to drown mine? Nyara stepped forward, her voice steady. Because truth is not in silence. It is in witnessing. You tried to bury her. The spirits refused to sleep. The possessed elders continued, "We remember the rivers turning backward, the children's cries, the harvests failing. We speak now in her flame because she has no mouth." Faces in the crowd twisted with guilt, dawning shame, relief, horror. Zubri wept then, not with calculated grace but raw sorrow. "All I did to protect my place," she rasped. "I believed power must be kept. I believed I could contain her, but she would not be hidden." Another voice rose, not from an elder but from the throng, a mother. "My daughter stopped breathing after that ritual. She nearly died. You watched her pain from your dais. You refused to stop and you made her suffer." Another voice, a young boy. "You took my father when he questioned you. He vanished in the night. I prayed to the spirits and they gave me her name in a dream." Zubri shut her eyes. The crowd's memories drowned her in waves. Every stolen life, every silent accusation, every spirit silenced. She dropped to her knees before the throne. "Yes," she whispered. "I confessed truth in lies, now I confess truth in shame. I stole lineage. I stole names. I stole futures." The elders' possession lifted. Their eyes cleared, their breathing returned. They bowed to Nyara, whose face bore forgiveness, not triumph. The high priest spoke at last, "Let the trial of truth end. Let the earth receive your tears, Zubri, as the land receives repentance. And let the ancestors forgive, or remember, according to justice." Nyara nodded. She held out no mercy unless it was earned. Zubri lowered her head. She was unmade before them, stripped of crown, memory, and court. Outside, statues cracked further. The land sighed. In the trees, leaves rustled as though applauding. In the crowd, people bowed their heads, some to apologize, others to breathe relief. Nyara turned to the elders. "Let the throne not silently remember only the highest story," she said, voice gentle but firm. "Let it remember truth. And let the names of the buried be spoken again, so no spirit stays forgotten." A hush followed. One elder stepped forward, holding a clean scroll. "We will rewrite the chronicles. Remove erasures. Record all names. Let history no longer be ruled by silence." Nyara nodded. The fire-scarred crown trembled on her brow, a crown reborn of memory rather than conquest. Then she offered her hand to Zubri. "She may rise," she said, "but not to rule. Only to bear witness, to counsel, not command." Zubri placed her trembling hand in Nyara's. The crowd gasped, not for a regal handoff but for reconciliation, a gesture of shared humanity. Then Nyara turned, looked to the assembled kingdom, lifted her voice. "Let this be the last night lies have ruled. Let history be born anew, not from gold nor fear, but from the bones of truth." The elders raised their staffs. The crowd answered with bows and cultured murmurs of, "Let it be so." Finally Nyara whispered a name, one not spoken aloud until now, Maisha, the ancient queen whose memory had awakened the ancestors that night. Her name resonated off stone walls and rippled through the ground. The trial of truth ended. Outside, darkness receded. Moonlight gilded the cracked statues. The stars seemed to lean closer, listening. The ground did not tremble anymore. And the kingdom exhaled. A queen ruled. A name was remembered. A promise was made, the future would bear witness. The dawn came without a trumpet. No drums, no parade of painted warriors. Only the hush of morning mist curling through the palace arches, the soft shuffle of sandals on polished stone, and the whisper of breath held by an entire kingdom. Nyara stood in the heart of the ancestral courtyard, where the first queens once bled upon stone to prove their strength, and now she was to be crowned. But she wore no jewels. No golden circlet pressed into her skull. No painted cheeks. No kohl to darken her eyes. Only the long embroidered veil that draped from her head to her waist, woven with charcoal thread and stitched with silent prayers. Her hands, marked with ash and symbols older than the throne itself, remained folded over her heart. The people watched from all sides, on rooftops, from trees, behind the cloisters of fallen statues. Some had journeyed for days to witness what had not happened in generations, the crowning of a queen not chosen by blood, but by reckoning. A hush hung heavy yet not oppressive. It was reverent. And in that silence even the wind refused to blow. At the foot of the high steps the council of elders stood in a crescent. Their robes were no longer white. Each bore a single stripe of ash across their chests, penance for years of silence. They no longer looked above her, they looked to her. And above them the throne sat, waiting. No longer tainted by secrets or corruption. No longer Zubri's. This day the throne was not the prize. It was the witness. The high priestess, voice softer than a breeze, stepped forward. In her arms the crown rested, not gold but braided vines and obsidian beads, embedded with river stones polished by generations of flood and fire. This was the true crown, lost for decades, unearthed only after Nyara's return. It bore no jewels. It bore story. The land has spoken, the priestess began, and the spirits have chosen not the loudest name, nor the bloodiest conquest, but the one who was burned, buried, and still rose. The crowd held its breath. Nyara, daughter of no royal mother, bearer of scars that speak louder than prophecy, do you accept the weight of memory? I do, came her voice low and steady. Do you accept the pain of truth, the burden of flame, the silence of legacy? I do. Do you accept that from this day forth, your breath is no longer only your own, but shared with the land, the people, and the forgotten dead? I do. The priestess bowed. Then, ever so slowly, she raised the crown and placed it atop Nyara's veil-covered head. The instant it touched, a breeze finally stirred, no storm, just a sigh from the world itself. Leaves danced down from the fig trees. The torches lining the courtyard flickered to life, though none were lit. And then the people saw it. Her scars, those twisted, gleaming lines that crept up her arms and neck, glowed faintly. Not with pain. Not with vengeance. But with a warmth like morning sun through mist. The veil did not hide it, it revealed it. The light that pulsed beneath her skin was not fire, but something older. Prophecy. Not a single cheer rang out. No ululations. No drums. Just the silence of a people who understood that this was not celebration. This was witnessing. Nyara turned, slowly so all could see her. The elders dropped to one knee. Behind them the people did the same, heads bowed, not in obedience but in honor. She walked to the throne but did not sit. Instead she stood beside it. And raised her hand. Only then did she speak. This is not a throne to rule from, she said. It is a place to remember. I will sit only when every name erased has been returned to the stone. When every village forgotten under Zubari's shadow is seen again. When the spirits that walk among us find rest, not rage. The wind picked up, swirling the dust gently around her feet. I wear no gold, she continued, voice growing firmer. Because gold forgets. But scars remember. I carry mine for every girl whose voice was taken. For every truth buried beneath ritual. For every child told their pain was weakness. My scars are not shame. They are scripture. From the back of the crowd, a girl stood up, perhaps no older than 12. She wore a worn tunic and a faded wrap, but her eyes glowed with something fierce. She took a step forward, then another, until she stood just inside the stone circle. And then she lifted her sleeve to reveal her own burn. A jagged line across her forearm, old but proud. Nyara saw her. Nodded once. More followed. Women, men, elders, children. One by one they stepped into the light and revealed their marks, not always burns but signs. A twisted ankle that never healed right. A cut above the brow from an unjust punishment. A branding scar from an accusation. They showed what had been hidden. What had been silenced. Nyara opened her arms. You are not broken, she said. You are marked. And in the mark there is meaning. The people responded, not with shouts but by standing straighter. By lifting each other. By allowing tears to fall not in shame but release. From that moment on, they would not call her Queen of Fire, nor the Flame Risen. They called her what the ancestors whispered that night through the leaves. Nyara the Marked. And in her rule, prophecy did not look like war or conquest. It looked like mothers no longer hiding their daughters. Like rivers that no longer turned black in mourning. Like old songs returned to market stalls and stories no longer starting with, once, there was a girl who should have died. As the sun rose fully over the palace walls, Nyara finally turned back to the throne. She sat, not to claim power but to begin the work of memory. And across the kingdom, the land itself sighed in peace. A new age began not in battle, but in quiet. In truth. In light.